El Niño has officially arrived. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Climate Prediction Center has confirmed it. And what makes this particular event especially significant is that it developed earlier and faster than many El Niño events typically do. That alone would be noteworthy. But what is generating even more attention is the growing probability that this El Niño could strengthen into what climate scientists classify as a very strong event, sometimes referred to informally as a Super El Niño. Early projections suggested roughly a 40% chance that this event would reach that threshold. More recent assessments have pushed that probability higher, with some estimates now placing the likelihood of a very strong El Niño at approximately 60 to 67%. If those projections hold, this could rank among the most significant El Niño events in the modern observational record, going back to 1950. But before diving into what that means practically, it is worth understanding what El Niño actually is, because the term gets used frequently in weather discussions without always being clearly explained. El Niño is one phase of a naturally recurring climate cycle known as the El Niño Southern Oscillation. This cycle involves changes in ocean temperatures and atmospheric wind patterns across the tropical Pacific Ocean. During a normal year, trade winds blow from east to west across the Pacific, pushing warm surface water toward Asia and allowing cooler, nutrient-rich water to rise along the coast of South America. That pattern influences weather systems across much of the globe. During an El Niño event, those trade winds weaken or even reverse direction. Warm water that would normally be pushed westward instead spreads eastward across the central and eastern Pacific. That shift in ocean heat distribution changes atmospheric circulation patterns, which in turn affects weather across multiple continents. The strength of an El Niño event is measured by how much warmer than average the sea surface temperatures become in a specific region of the equatorial Pacific. For an event to be classified as a very strong or super El Niño, those temperatures typically need to exceed 2 degrees Celsius above the long-term average. Some reliable computer models are now suggesting that this threshold could not only be met, but significantly exceeded as the event continues to develop through the remainder of this year and into early next year. To put the current situation in historical context, the strongest El Niño events on record occurred in 1972, 1982, 1997, and most recently in 2015. The 2015 event was particularly powerful and had wide-ranging effects on global weather patterns, marine ecosystems, and agricultural systems. If current projections are accurate, the developing El Niño could rival or potentially exceed those historical events in terms of intensity. That prospect has significant implications across multiple areas. Let us start with hurricanes, because that is often the first thing people think about when El Niño is mentioned. El Niño events tend to increase wind shear across the Atlantic basin. Wind shear is essentially a change in wind speed or direction at different altitudes. When wind shear is high, it becomes more difficult for tropical storms and hurricanes to organize and maintain their structure. As a result, El Niño years historically tend to produce fewer Atlantic hurricanes compared to La Niña years, when wind shear is reduced. However, the relationship is not absolute. El Niño does not eliminate Atlantic hurricane activity, it generally suppresses it. Individual storms can still form and become powerful, particularly if other conditions align favorably. And it is important to remember that it only takes one hurricane making landfall to create a catastrophic situation, regardless of how quiet the overall season might be. On the other side of the equation, El Niño tends to supercharge hurricane activity in the central and eastern Pacific basins. Warmer ocean temperatures in those regions provide more fuel for tropical cyclone development. Communities in Hawaii, Mexico's Pacific coast, and other areas in the Central Pacific may face elevated risk during strong El Niño years. So the hurricane picture is not simply more storms or fewer storms. It is a geographic redistribution of where tropical activity is most likely to concentrate. Stronger El Niño events tend to make these regional shifts more pronounced and more reliable. Now let us talk about what a strong El Niño typically means for winter weather across the United States, because this is where the effects may be felt most dramatically by the largest number of people. During significant El Niño events, the jet stream, which is the river of fast-moving air high in the atmosphere that steers weather systems, tends to shift southward across the southern United States. That shift brings a more active storm track across the southern tier of the country, which often results in increased rainfall and sometimes cooler than average temperatures in states stretching from California through the Gulf Coast and into the southeast. Meanwhile, the northern portions of the United States and western Canada often experience warmer than average winter temperatures during El Niño events. That does not mean cold weather disappears entirely. Cold snaps and winter storms can still occur, but the overall pattern tends to favor milder conditions across much of the northern half of the country. Some meteorologists and climate scientists who have studied this developing event have indicated that the upcoming winter could feature one of the strongest El Niño influences on United States weather patterns in recent memory. If the event reaches Super El Niño status by the November through January timeframe, its fingerprint on winter weather could be substantial. For the southern United States, that could mean significantly increased rainfall, elevated flood risk, and a more active, severe weather pattern. For the northern United States, it could mean a milder winter overall, with potential implications for snowpack, ski resorts, winter recreation, and heating costs. However, it is essential to be clear about the limitations of these projections. El Niño describes a broad climate pattern. It shifts the odds of certain weather outcomes. It does not guarantee specific conditions in specific locations on specific dates. Other climate factors, regional geography, and natural weather variability all play roles in determining what actually happens at any given location. The honest framing is this: a strong El Niño makes certain outcomes more likely. It does not make them certain. Anyone who tells you they know exactly what will happen in your city this winter based solely on El Niño is oversimplifying a complex system. That said, the historical track record provides valuable guidance for preparation. Now, let us discuss flooding, drought, and heat, because El Niño's effects extend well beyond wind and rain patterns. In certain parts of the world, particularly Australia, Indonesia, and portions of Southeast Asia, El Niño events are associated with reduced rainfall, drought conditions, and elevated temperatures. Those conditions increase the risk of wildfires, strain water supplies, and can devastate agricultural production. The 2015 Super El Niño contributed to severe drought conditions across parts of Southeast Asia, significant wildfire activity in Indonesia, and widespread coral bleaching across tropical ocean regions. If the current event reaches similar or greater intensity, comparable impacts should be anticipated. Within the United States, drought concerns are already present in several regions. Parts of the western United States have experienced chronic water supply challenges for years. While El Niño can sometimes bring beneficial rainfall to portions of the West Coast, particularly California, that precipitation does not always arrive in the right amounts, at the right times, or in the right locations to resolve long-term water deficits. Furthermore, heavy rainfall events associated with El Niño can create their own problems. Intense storms dropping large amounts of rain over short periods can cause flash flooding, mudslides, and infrastructure damage, particularly in areas that have experienced recent wildfires and lost protective vegetation cover. So the relationship between El Niño and drought is nuanced. In some regions, El Niño may provide temporary relief. In others, it may intensify existing challenges. And in some cases, the pattern of precipitation may shift in ways that create new problems even as it addresses old ones. Ocean impacts deserve significant attention as well, particularly given the growing concerns about marine ecosystem health globally. El Niño events are associated with marine heat waves, which are periods of abnormally high ocean temperatures that can persist for weeks or months. These heat waves can trigger widespread coral bleaching, a stress response in coral reefs that can lead to coral death if temperatures remain elevated for extended periods. The 2015 Super El Niño contributed to one of the most severe global coral bleaching events ever recorded. Scientists documented bleaching across reef systems in the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans. Recovery from such events takes years, and repeated bleaching episodes can permanently damage reef ecosystems that support enormous biodiversity and provide economic value to coastal communities through fishing and tourism. Beyond coral, marine heat waves associated with El Niño can disrupt broader ocean food chains. Changes in water temperature affect where fish species concentrate, which can alter commercial fishing patterns. During previous strong El Niño events, fishermen in various parts of the Pacific reported significant changes in catch composition and difficulty finding species that normally inhabit certain waters. These ocean changes can also have cascading effects. Shifts in fish populations affect seabird colonies, marine mammal populations, and the broader ecosystem dynamics that depend on predictable ocean conditions. Now, let us address something that often gets overlooked in El Niño discussions, but may actually represent the most immediately important takeaway for most people. Preparation matters more than prediction. The tendency when large climate events are forecast is to focus on whether the forecast will be exactly right. People want to know precisely how much rain will fall, exactly where flooding will occur, and whether their specific area will be affected. Those are understandable questions, but they can create a false sense of security when answers are uncertain and a false sense of urgency when preliminary forecasts change. The more productive approach is to understand what outcomes become more likely during a strong El Niño and to prepare accordingly regardless of whether every projection proves perfectly accurate. For farmers and agricultural communities, preparation means understanding how altered precipitation patterns could affect planting schedules, irrigation needs, and crop selection. If winter brings heavier than normal rainfall to certain regions, fields could become waterlogged. If drought intensifies in other areas, water availability for irrigation could tighten. Some agricultural innovators are already working on developing crop varieties that require less water, which could provide resilience against drought conditions regardless of whether they are caused by El Niño or longer-term climate trends. That kind of forward-thinking adaptation is exactly the type of preparation that pays dividends over time. For homeowners and communities, preparation means reviewing flood insurance coverage, understanding local flood risk, ensuring drainage systems are functional, and having emergency supplies available. It means not waiting until floodwaters are rising to think about whether your property is vulnerable. For emergency managers and local governments, preparation means stress testing response plans, ensuring communication systems are ready, pre-positioning resources in areas that historically experience problems during strong El Niño winters, and educating residents about risks before they materialize. For individuals, preparation can be as simple as understanding what El Niño historically does to your region's weather and making reasonable adjustments. If you live in an area prone to winter flooding during El Niño years, take that seriously. If you live in a region where El Niño typically brings milder winters, do not assume cold weather is impossible. Prepare for the most likely scenarios while remaining flexible for surprises. There is another dimension to this that deserves honest discussion, and it relates to the broader temperature picture. Strong El Niño events add significant heat to the global climate system. The warmth from the Pacific Ocean gets redistributed into the atmosphere, which tends to push global average temperatures higher. The 2015 Super El Niño contributed to record-breaking global temperatures during that period. If the current El Niño reaches comparable or greater intensity, climate scientists broadly expect that global temperatures will be pushed higher as well. Some projections suggest that this year, and particularly next year, could see record or near-record global average temperatures, driven by the combination of the El Niño event and the underlying long-term warming trend. That does not mean every location on Earth will experience record heat. Global averages reflect the combined temperature across the entire planet. Individual locations may experience warmer than average conditions, cooler than average conditions, or near normal conditions, depending on how the broader atmospheric patterns interact with regional geography. But it does mean that the overall heat budget of the planet is likely to increase, which has implications for weather extremes, ocean conditions, ice coverage, and ecosystem stress. It is worth noting that while El Niño is a natural climate cycle that has occurred throughout recorded history, the baseline conditions into which this El Niño is arriving are different from previous decades. Ocean temperatures globally have already been running above historical averages. Adding a strong El Niño signal on top of already elevated baseline temperatures creates the potential for compounded effects. That is not a political statement. It is a description of the physical conditions that scientists are observing and measuring. Now, one common misconception about El Niño is that it simply means rain everywhere. That is not how it works. El Niño redistributes weather patterns. Some areas get wetter, some get drier, some get warmer, some get cooler. The effects are regional, and they depend on the specific characteristics of each El Niño event, as well as other climate factors operating simultaneously. Anyone who tells you that El Niño means the entire country will be under a rain cloud is oversimplifying to the point of inaccuracy. The reality is far more nuanced and geographically specific. Understanding that nuance is important because it helps you calibrate your preparation appropriately. A farmer in the Southern Plains faces different risks than a homeowner in the Pacific Northwest. A coastal community in California faces different challenges than a city in the northern Midwest. El Niño does not deliver the same experience everywhere. It reshuffles the deck. So what should you be doing right now? First, pay attention to updates from official sources. The Climate Prediction Center issues regular El Niño advisories and seasonal outlooks. These are based on the best available science and are updated as new data comes in. Following those updates will give you a much more accurate picture than social media speculation or sensationalized headlines. Second, understand your regional risks. Research what strong El Niño events have historically meant for your specific area. Your local National Weather Service office often provides historical context and regional outlooks that can help you understand what to expect. Third, prepare practically. Review insurance coverage. Check emergency supplies. Make sure you have plans for severe weather scenarios. If you are in agriculture, talk to extension services and financial advisors about managing weather-related risk. Fourth, stay flexible. Forecasts will evolve as the event progresses. Early season projections provide general guidance, but specific weather outcomes weeks or months in advance remain inherently uncertain. Preparation should be based on ranges of possibility, not single-point predictions. Finally, keep perspective. El Niño events, even strong ones, are manageable when communities and individuals are informed and prepared. The historical record shows that societies have weathered these events before and adapted. The key variable is whether preparation begins early enough and is taken seriously enough. This El Niño is developing rapidly. It is strengthening earlier than many events do, and the probability of it reaching very strong or super status is significant. Those factors make it worth paying attention to now, not later. The decisions made in the coming months, by farmers, by emergency planners, by homeowners, by community leaders, and by individuals, will largely determine how effectively the impacts are managed when they arrive. Preparation is not panic, it is prudence. And with an event of this potential magnitude, prudence seems well justified. If you have questions about how El Niño might affect your region specifically, research your local historical patterns, check official forecasts, and consider reaching out to local emergency management or agricultural extension services for guidance tailored to your area. The information is available. The projections are being updated regularly, and the time to pay attention is now, while there is still time to act on what the science is telling us.